The letter promised civilization. What Evelyn Carter got was abandonment, rejected within 48 hours by a mail-order husband who decided she was too educated, too tall, too opinionated. Everything that made her worthless back east made her equally unwanted out west. Now she sat at a dusty depot with nowhere left to run, watching her last chance at belonging disappear down a dirt road. Then a stranger asked her one question that changed everything. This is a story about what happens when the world rejects you, and you decide to reject it right back. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The Arizona Territory had a way of stripping lies down to bone. Evelyn Carter learned that within 5 minutes of stepping off the stagecoach in Copper Springs, the photograph Gerald Whitmore had sent showed a distinguished gentleman in a pressed suit standing before what appeared to be a substantial home. The man waiting at the depot was 20 years older than his picture, with a paunch straining against his vest and eyes that calculated her value like livestock. "Miss Carter." Not a question, an assessment. "Mr. Whitmore." Evelyn kept her voice level, though dust coated her throat and her corset felt like it was crushing her lungs. 3 weeks of travel, trains, coaches, and one memorable wagon ride through a rainstorm had brought her to this moment. She'd imagined it differently. He circled her once, slow. She was tall for a woman, 5'9" in her travel boots, and she'd never learned to make herself smaller. Her dress was practical gray wool, her trunk was heavier with books than clothes, and her hair had given up any pretense of Eastern refinement somewhere around Kansas. "You're not what I expected," Gerald said finally. "The feeling is mutual." His jaw tightened. Strike one. Apparently wives weren't supposed to have opinions within the first 60 seconds. The boarding house was 3 blocks from the depot, which Gerald walked ahead of her, not offering to carry anything. Evelyn dragged her trunk herself, leaving a trail in the dust. A few townspeople watched from doorways and windows. She could feel their stares like heat on her back. Another mail-order bride. Another Eastern woman who thought she could handle the frontier. Her room was small, clean, and temporary. Gerald made that clear. "We'll have dinner tonight, Mrs. Henderson's table, 7 o'clock. Wear something appropriate." Appropriate? Less severe. He gestured vaguely at her dress, her face, her entire existence. "We have standards here, Miss Carter. This may be the frontier, but we're not savages." The door closed behind him. Evelyn sat on the narrow bed and stared at her trunk. Inside were 12 books, philosophy, science, literature, her real dowry, the only things of value she owned. Her mother had called it foolishness. "Men don't want women who read more than recipes, Evelyn. You're 28 years old. This is your last chance." Last chance. The words had haunted her across an entire continent. She'd believed Gerald's letters. They'd been articulate, thoughtful, filled with descriptions of a growing town that valued education and progress. He'd written about building a library, establishing proper schools, creating civilization in the wilderness. For a woman whose only currency was knowledge, it had sounded like salvation. Should have known better than to trust pretty words on paper. Dinner was worse than the arrival. Mrs. Henderson ran the boarding house and apparently the town's social hierarchy. She was a thin woman with sharp eyes and a smile that never reached them. Her dining room table seated 8, all regulars who clearly knew each other and had already formed opinions about the newcomer before she sat down. "Miss Carter is from Boston," Gerald announced, as if that explained everything wrong with her. "How refined," Mrs. Henderson said, serving potatoes with surgical precision. "We don't get many educated women out here. Most can't handle the adjustment." "I'm adaptable." Evelyn cut her meat carefully, aware that every movement was being judged. "Are you?" This from a Mr. Brennan, a merchant with mutton chops and opinions. Eastern women tend to have delicate constitutions. The heat, the isolation, the lack of amenities. "I'm not delicate." Gerald's hand tightened on his fork. Strike 2. Apparently contradicting men at dinner was also forbidden. The meal continued in that vein, carefully worded insults disguised as concern, loaded questions designed to expose her inadequacies. Did she know how to preserve food? Manage servants? She had no money for servants. Host social functions? run a proper Christian household, and the books. Mrs. Henderson had heard about the books. Gerald mentioned you brought quite a library, she said, her tone suggesting Evelyn had brought smallpox instead. Philosophy, wasn't it? And scientific texts? Among other things. How unusual. Most women prefer devotional reading, practical texts. The implication was clear: normal women, acceptable women. Evelyn set down her fork. I find that understanding the world requires more than recipes and prayer. The silence was immediate and total. Gerald's face went red, then white. Mrs. Henderson's smile vanished. Mr. Brennan coughed into his napkin, and Evelyn realized she'd just committed social suicide before her first night in town was even over. I think, Gerald said quietly, we should discuss this privately. They walked back to the boarding house in silence. Inside her room, Gerald closed the door and stood with his back to it, blocking any exit. What exactly did you think you were doing? Having dinner. You insulted Mrs. Henderson. You contradicted me in public. He stopped, jaw working. You're not what I need, Miss Carter. I was clear in my letters about the kind of woman I was seeking. Someone refined but practical, educated but not difficult. Difficult. Evelyn's laugh was sharp. I answered questions honestly. You made yourself unmarriageable in one evening. In this town, Mrs. Henderson's opinion carries weight. Without her approval, no woman can establish herself socially. Then perhaps I don't want to establish myself socially. Then what the hell do you want? For the first time, genuine emotion cracked through his affected gentleman's facade. You came here to marry. That requires fitting in, Miss Carter, following rules, being what people expect. Evelyn stood slowly. She was 3 inches taller than Gerald, and she didn't slouch. Your letters described a town that valued progress and education. Was that a lie? I described a town building toward civilization. That requires order, structure, people knowing their place. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. There's $200 here. Enough for passage back east and some extra. Consider it a settlement for your trouble. You're sending me back. I'm releasing you from an arrangement that clearly won't work. He set the envelope on the dresser. The eastbound stage leaves in 3 days. I suggest you take it. He left. Evelyn sat on the bed and stared at the envelope. $200. 3 days. And nowhere to go. Boston was impossible. She'd sold everything to make this trip, burned every bridge to escape a city that had no use for unmarried women pushing 30. Her mother was dead. Her father had remarried and made it clear his new wife had no interest in housing a spinster stepdaughter. She had a cousin in Philadelphia who'd made polite noises about visiting sometime, but Evelyn knew pity when she heard it. The frontier was supposed to be different. Supposed to be a place where what you could do mattered more than who you were. Gerald's letters had promised that. They'd promised a partner who valued intelligence, a community that needed teachers, a future built on more than just survival. Lies. All of it. She opened her trunk and pulled out a book at random. Emerson. Self-reliance. The irony wasn't lost on her. What I must do is all that concerns me, not what people think. Easy to write, harder to live. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat by the window watching Copper Springs settle into darkness. Lights going out in windows, streets emptying, the whole town tucking itself into bed with its judgments and expectations intact. Somewhere out there was the life Gerald had promised in his letters. Somewhere was a place that needed what she had to offer. But clearly it wasn't here, and she had no map to find it. By morning, she'd made a decision. If she only had 3 days, she might as well see what this territory actually looked like beyond one small-minded town. She dressed in her most practical clothes, left her trunk locked in her room, and walked. Copper Springs was bigger than it looked from the depot. There was a main street with a general store, saloon, doctor's office, and what claimed to be a hotel. Side streets branched off into residential areas, neat houses with gardens, attempting to recreate Eastern domesticity in dust and heat. At the edge of town, things got rougher. Work camps, livestock pens, and beyond that, the open territory. She walked until the buildings thinned and the land took over. The desert was nothing like she'd imagined, not empty, alive in ways that didn't announce themselves, Birds she couldn't name, plants that looked dead but weren't, heat that made the air shimmer, and distances impossible to judge. And silence. Real silence, the kind that made you aware of your own breathing. Evelyn sat on a rock and pulled out the book she'd brought. Reading outside had always been forbidden, unladylike, impractical, attention-seeking. She opened to a random page and read until her eyes adjusted to the glare. That's a good spot. She jerked around. A man stood about 10 feet away, close enough that she should have heard him approach. He was tall, lean, probably mid-30s, dressed in work clothes and a hat that had seen better years. He wasn't from town. She would have remembered him from dinner. Sorry, didn't mean to startle you. His voice was quiet, Western but not affected. This is private land, but Mrs. Cole doesn't mind people stopping. I just wanted to make sure you weren't lost. I'm not lost. Okay. He didn't move. You're the woman who came in yesterday, Gerald Whitmore's situation. Of course, small town, big gossip. News travels fast. Not much else to do out here, but talk. He shifted his weight, and Evelyn noticed he kept his hands visible, non-threatening. Heard it didn't go well. That's generous. She closed her book. Let me guess. The whole town knows I insulted Mrs. Henderson and ruined my chances before unpacking my trunk. Something like that. A pause. Also heard you brought books. Real ones, not just... He gestured vaguely. Not just devotional reading? Yeah. Something that might have been a smile crossed his face. That impressed some people, if you can believe it. Scared others. Which category are you in? He considered that seriously. Interested, I guess. Don't meet many people out here who read by choice. Do you? Can't. Direct, no shame. Never learned proper. Can sign my name, read some basic words, but... He shrugged. Wasn't much call for it growing up. By the time I realized it mattered, seemed too late to start. Evelyn studied him. No self-pity in that admission, just fact. Most men would have hidden that information or gotten defensive. It's never too late. Maybe. He looked out at the desert. I'm Caleb Turner, foreman at the Iron Ridge Ranch, about 12 miles northeast. We run cattle, some horses. Mrs. Cole owns it. She's the one whose land you're sitting on. Should I apologize? Nah. Like I said, she doesn't mind. He pulled off his hat, turned it in his hands. Look, I don't know your situation, and it's none of my business, but I heard Gerald gave you money to leave. You heard correctly. You taking it? Evelyn opened her mouth to say yes. Of course, yes. What other choice did she have? But something stopped her. Maybe it was the way Caleb asked, like her answer actually mattered, like it was a real question, not a foregone conclusion. I don't know where else to go. That's not the same as wanting to leave. No, she admitted. It's not. Caleb was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then, the Iron Ridge has 6 families working the land. Most have kids ranging from 5 to 14. None of them can read more than basic words. None can write except their names. And there's no school within 50 miles. Evelyn's heart picked up speed. You're offering me a job? Mrs. Cole is, or she would be if you were interested. He met her eyes straight on. It's not easy work. Teaching ranch kids isn't like teaching in a proper school. They're rough, distracted, needed for chores. And the pay isn't much, room, board, and $30 a month. But it's honest work and it matters. Does Mrs. Cole know about everything? She knows Gerald Whitmore is an ass who wanted a decoration, not a partner. She knows you're educated and currently unwanted in town. Caleb put his hat back on. What she wants to know is if you can teach and if you're willing to try. This was insane. A job offer from a stranger, on private land, 12 miles from the nearest town. Every practical bone in Evelyn's body screamed danger. But another part, the part that had dragged books across a continent, that had refused to make herself smaller, that had walked into the desert alone. That part was screaming something else entirely. When would I start? Soon as you're ready. We can send a wagon tomorrow if you want to collect your things. I should meet Mrs. Cole first. Fair. I can bring you out to the ranch today, bring you back tonight. You can decide after. He gestured toward a horse tied nearby. It's a ride, though. You okay with that? Evelyn had been on a horse exactly twice in her life, both times side saddle at a walking pace. I'll manage. The ride was brutal. Caleb kept a steady pace, not pushing, but not dawdling, and Evelyn clung to the saddle with muscles she didn't know she had. The landscape opened up the farther they got from town, vast stretches of desert punctuated by rock formations that looked like monuments to something ancient. Hawks circled overhead. The heat was relentless. You doing okay? Caleb called back. Fine, Evelyn lied. We can rest if you need. I said I'm fine. He didn't push, just kept riding. The Iron Ridge Ranch appeared gradually, first the fence lines, then outbuildings, then the main house. It was bigger than Evelyn expected, a sprawling structure that had clearly been added onto over years, functional, not fancy. Several smaller houses dotted the property, smoke rising from chimneys. People moved between buildings, men working, women managing, children everywhere. Caleb helped her down from the horse. Her legs nearly gave out. Take a minute, he said quietly. Mrs. Cole's in the main house. I'll let her know you're here. Evelyn leaned against the fence and tried to look like she wasn't dying. Everything hurt. Her back, her thighs, her dignity. But she was here. Wherever here was. The main house door opened and a woman emerged. Mara Cole was not what Evelyn expected. She was probably 50, dressed in practical work clothes, with sun-weathered skin and eyes that missed nothing. No pretense of Eastern femininity, no apologetic posture. She walked like she owned the ground beneath her feet, which technically she did. Miss Carter, her voice was low, direct. You look like hell. Thank you. A brief smile. Come inside. We'll talk. The house was cooler, darker, filled with evidence of actual living, books, papers, work tools. Mara gestured to a chair and poured water from a pitcher without asking if Evelyn wanted it. Drink. You're dehydrated. She sat across from Evelyn, studying her the way someone might study a horse before buying. Caleb says you're educated. Says Gerald Whitmore was too stupid to see value when it arrived on his doorstep. That's generous. It's accurate. I've known Gerald 15 years. He wants a China doll, not a person. Mara leaned back. I need a teacher. Real one, not someone just minding children while parents work. Someone who can build something that lasts. You think you can do that? I don't know, Evelyn said honestly. I've never taught before. But you know things. Yes. You willing to share what you know, even with people who might not appreciate it immediately? Evelyn thought about dinner at Mrs. Henderson's table. Yes. You willing to work hard? Because this isn't a charity position. I need someone who'll show up every day, who'll adapt when things don't go to plan, who won't quit when it gets difficult. I don't quit. Mara's smile was genuine this time. Good. Because half the parents out here will fight you. They'll say education is waste, that kids need to work, that reading is for rich people. You'll have students who can barely sit still, who'd rather be anywhere else, who'll test every boundary you set. And you'll be doing it in a building that's currently used for storage, with materials you'll have to beg or make yourself, for pay that won't make you rich. When do I start? That's it? No more questions? Evelyn set down her water glass. Mrs. Cole, 3 days ago I believed I was coming to a civilized town to marry a gentleman who valued education. Instead, I met a man who wanted me to be smaller, quieter, less. I have $200 and 3 days to disappear back to a place that doesn't want me. So no, I don't have more questions. I have an answer, and it's yes. Mara studied her for a long moment. Then she stood and extended her hand. Welcome to Iron Ridge, Miss Carter. Try not to disappoint me. They shook. Evelyn's hand was soft from years of indoor living. Mara's was calloused and strong. It felt like a covenant. The tour of the ranch took 2 hours. Mara showed her everything, the land, the operation, the families. The Hendersons, no relation to the boarding house tyrant, had 3 children. The Ruizes had 4. The Chens had 2. Other families, other children. All of them watching the strange Eastern woman with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. The schoolhouse was exactly as bad as promised. A storage building filled with old equipment, dust, and pack rat nests. But it had 4 walls, a roof, and windows that could be cleaned. "Can you work with this?" Mara asked. Evelyn walked the perimeter, mentally cataloging what would need to happen. Cleaning, obviously. Furniture, desks, or tables somehow. Slates, chalk, paper if possible. Books? She'd have to use her own to start. "Yes." "You sound sure." "I'm not, but I'll figure it out." "Good." Mara headed for the door. "Caleb will bring you back to town tonight, help you collect your things tomorrow. You can move into the teacher's quarters, small house behind the school. It's not much, but it's private." "Mrs. Cole." Evelyn stopped her. "Why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" "Taking a chance on someone with no experience, no references, nothing to prove I can do what you're asking." Mara turned back, her expression unreadable. "You know what I see when I look at you, Miss Carter? I see someone who read books instead of learning to be decorative. Someone who chose knowledge when the world told her to choose marriage. Someone tall who refuses to slouch. That tells me you've been fighting your whole life to be exactly who you are. That's the kind of person I need teaching these children. Not someone who'll train them to be small." Evelyn's throat tightened. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you've survived your first week." The ride back to town was quieter. Caleb didn't push conversation, just maintained a steady pace as the sun dropped lower. Evelyn's entire body ached, her mind was spinning, and she couldn't stop replaying Mara's words. Someone who refuses to slouch. "You okay back there?" Caleb called. "Thinking." "That's allowed." They reached Copper Springs as darkness settled. Caleb helped her down outside the boarding house, and this time she managed not to collapse. "I'll be here at 8 tomorrow," he said. "We'll load up your things, get you settled." "Caleb," Evelyn steadied herself against the horse. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why did you come find me?" "This morning, out in the desert. How did you even know I'd be there?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. "Saw you walk out of town. Figured someone that determined to get away from people might appreciate knowing there were different people available. Better ones, maybe." "You took a risk." "So did you." He tipped his hat. "See you tomorrow, Miss Carter." He rode off, leaving Evelyn standing in the street with dust on her dress and possibility crackling in her chest. Inside, Mrs. Henderson was waiting. "Miss Carter, Mr. Whitmore mentioned you'd be leaving soon." "Change of plans." The landlady's eyebrows rose. "Oh?" "I've accepted a teaching position at the Iron Ridge Ranch. I'll be moving there tomorrow." "The Iron Ridge?" Mrs. Henderson's tone could have frozen water. "How rustic. I'm sure you'll find it suits your particular nature." "I'm sure I will." Evelyn climbed the stairs to her room, locked the door, and allowed herself one moment of pure, unfiltered terror. She just committed to teaching children she'd never met, using materials she didn't have, in a subject she'd never formally studied. She was about to move 12 miles from civilization to live alone on a working ranch, dependent on people she'd known for less than a day. It was reckless, impractical, possibly insane. It was also the first choice she'd made in years that felt entirely hers. She opened her trunk and began sorting what to take. Books, obviously, all of them. Clothes, the practical ones, nothing designed to impress. Paper, ink, what few teaching materials she owned. It all fit in 2 trunks, everything she owned in the world. "This is your last chance," her mother had said. Turned out she'd been right, just not in the way she'd meant. Sleep didn't come easy, but when it did, Evelyn dreamed of open spaces and children's voices and a future she couldn't quite see but could almost touch. Tomorrow she'd find out if she'd made the right choice, or if she'd just traded one disaster for another. Either way, there was no going back now. Caleb arrived at exactly 8 o'clock, driving a wagon that had seen better decades. Evelyn was waiting on the boarding house steps with her 2 trunks, dressed in the most practical outfit she owned, a dark blue dress with minimal fuss and boots she could actually walk in. Mrs. Henderson watched from the doorway, her disapproval thick enough to cut. "Leaving us so soon, Miss Carter?" "Yes." "Such a shame. I'm sure Mr. Whitmore is devastated." Evelyn seriously doubted Gerald had spared her a second thought. "Please give him my regards." Caleb loaded the trunks without comment, then helped Evelyn onto the wagon seat. His hands were steady, impersonal, professional. As they pulled away, she caught Mrs. Henderson's final look, a mixture of satisfaction and something else. Pity, maybe, or prophecy, like she was watching someone drive toward inevitable failure. The morning was cooler than yesterday, the air sharp and clean. As Copper Springs disappeared behind them, Evelyn felt something in her chest loosen. She hadn't realized how tightly she'd been holding herself until the town was gone. "You sleep okay?" Caleb asked after a few minutes. "Not really. You?" "Never do." He kept his eyes on the road. "Thinking about the work, mostly. What needs doing, what'll probably go wrong. Keeps the brain busy." "What do you think will go wrong with me?" He glanced at her, surprised. "That's direct. I'm about to teach children I've never met with materials I don't have in a building full of rat nests. I'd rather know what you actually think instead of polite lies." Caleb was quiet for a moment, navigating around a wash in the road. "Honestly, I think you'll struggle with how rough they are. Not mean rough, just wild. Ranch kids grow up working, fighting, living hard. They're not going to sit quiet and listen because you're the teacher. You'll have to earn it." "How?" "That's the part I don't know. Every person's different." He shifted the reins. "But Mara doesn't make mistakes about people often. If she thinks you can handle it, probably you can. You have a lot of faith in her judgment. She gave me a job when I was 17 and stupid, taught me everything I know about running land, managing people, thinking past tomorrow. Yeah, I trust her judgment." Evelyn studied his profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon. He moved through the world like someone who'd learned early that safety was something you created, not something you counted on. "How long have you worked at Iron Ridge?" 18 years. Started as a stable hand, worked up to foreman about 6 years back." "That's a long time in one place." "It's home." Simple, direct. Never saw the point in wandering just to wander. Found what worked, stayed with it. The landscape shifted as they traveled, more green than she'd expected, more variation. There were sections where water clearly ran during certain seasons, creating pockets of dense growth. Rock formations rose up like cathedrals, and everywhere, that enormous sky that made Evelyn feel simultaneously insignificant and possible. "Can I ask you something?" She kept her voice casual. "Yesterday, when you said you can't read, how much is that true?" Caleb's shoulders tightened slightly. "All of it." "Why?" "Because you talk like someone who thinks in complex ways. You use specific vocabulary. You're clearly not uneducated, just untaught." "There a difference?" "A huge one." Evelyn watched his reaction carefully. "Education is formal learning, schools, books, instruction. Intelligence is something else entirely. You can have one without the other. You saying I'm smart even though I'm ignorant? I'm saying you're observant and thoughtful despite lacking formal education, which means you could learn quickly if you wanted to." His hands tightened on the reins. "Why would I want to?" "I don't know. Why would you?" She wasn't pushing, just curious. "You've survived 35 years without it. You have a good job, people's respect. What would reading give you that you don't already have?" Caleb was quiet for so long that Evelyn thought she'd overstepped. Then, choice. One word, but it landed heavy. "Can't read contracts," he continued. "Can't verify what people tell me is written down. Can't learn things unless someone teaches me direct. Can't—" He stopped, jaw working. "There's a whole world in books, right? Knowledge, ideas, things beyond what I can see and touch. And I can't access any of it. That's not the same as choosing not to read. It's not having the choice at all." Evelyn felt something shift in her understanding of this man. You want to learn. Want and can are different things. What if they didn't have to be? He looked at her then, really looked. "You offering to teach me? Would you let me?" "Why would you want to? You'll have your hands full with the kids." "Because you're right. There's a whole world in books, and you're clearly someone who thinks about the world carefully. Seems like a waste to keep those two things separated." Caleb turned his attention back to the road, but something in his posture had changed. "I'll think about it." They rode in silence after that, but it felt different. Less like strangers sharing space, more like two people circling something neither quite knew how to name yet. The Iron Ridge appeared around mid-morning. In daylight, with fresh eyes, Evelyn could see the operation more clearly. This wasn't some struggling frontier claim. It was a working ranch with infrastructure, planning, investment, fences in good repair, buildings maintained, livestock that looked healthy, gardens actually producing food. Several people were already waiting when they arrived. Mara stood front and center, arms crossed, while behind her clustered a group that Evelyn assumed were the parents. "Miss Carter," Mara's greeting was businesslike. "These folks wanted to meet you before committing their children to your care. Seemed fair." Evelyn climbed down from the wagon with as much dignity as she could manage after 3 hours of rough road. She was dusty, windblown, and probably looked like exactly what she was, an Eastern woman out of her element. But she'd learned something from facing Mrs. Henderson's dining room table. Apologizing for existing never helped. "I'm Evelyn Carter," she said clearly. "I'm here to teach your children to read, write, and think. I can't promise it'll be easy, and I can't promise they'll enjoy it. But I can promise I'll show up every day and give them everything I know." A man stepped forward, tall, weathered, with hands that looked like they'd built half the structures on the property. "Tom Henderson. Got 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl. What makes you qualified to teach them?" "Honestly, nothing formal. I'm not a trained teacher, but I'm educated, I'm dedicated, and I believe every child deserves the chance to access knowledge. Whether they use it or not is up to them." "Pretty words," a woman said from the back. "What happens when pretty words meet reality? When kids don't want to learn? When they'd rather be working? When parents say education's a waste?" "Then I'll have failed," Evelyn said simply. "But I'd rather fail trying than succeed at convincing children they're not worth the effort." Mara's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Another woman pushed forward, younger, with suspicious eyes and a baby on her hip. "You got kids of your own?" "No." "Then how you gonna know what's best for ours?" "I won't. You will." Evelyn met her gaze straight on. "I'm not here to replace you or tell you how to raise your children. I'm here to teach them skills, reading, writing, arithmetic. What they do with those skills, how you guide them, that's your territory." The young woman didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue further. Tom Henderson crossed his arms. "My boys are rough. They fight, they talk back, they don't sit still easy. You gonna handle that?" "I don't know. Probably I'll make mistakes. Probably they'll push every boundary I try to set. But I'm not delicate, Mr. Henderson, and I don't scare easy. We'll figure it out together." He exchanged a look with his wife. "When you starting?" "Soon as the schoolhouse is ready. Few days, maybe." "Kids help with that?" Evelyn blinked. "What?" "Getting the building ready, cleaning, fixing, setting up. Kids help with that. They'll feel invested. Plus, they'll see you work. That matters." "Then yes, absolutely." The group talked among themselves for a few minutes while Evelyn stood there trying not to look as nervous as she felt. These people were evaluating whether to trust her with their children's education. It was terrifying and humbling in equal measure. Finally, Mara stepped forward. "All right, we'll try this. Miss Carter teaches, kids attend when they're not needed for critical work. After 3 months, we evaluate. Everyone agree?" Murmured assents, not enthusiastic, but not hostile either. Evelyn would take it. The crowd dispersed and Mara gestured toward a small house behind the storage building. "That's yours. It's basic, but it's sound. Caleb, help her get settled." The teacher's quarters were exactly as advertised. Basic, 1 room with a bed, table, chair, and stove, a small separate space for washing, windows that actually opened, and blessedly, completely, private. Caleb set down her trunks. "Not much?" "It's mine. That's enough." He nodded, understanding. "I'll let you unpack. Dinner's communal tonight at the main house, 6 o'clock. Mara expects everyone who can make it." "Caleb," she stopped him at the door. "Thank you. For yesterday, for today, for all of it." "Haven't done much." "You gave me an option when I didn't have one. That's not nothing." He looked uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Just seemed like the right thing." He left before she could say more. Evelyn spent the next hour unpacking. Books went on the shelf someone had built into the wall. Not enough space, but she'd make it work. Clothes in the small wardrobe, personal items on the table. By the time she finished, the space felt less like a structure and more like possibility. Then she walked to the schoolhouse. It was worse in full daylight. Dust coated everything, including several generations of pack rat nests. Old equipment crowded the space. Broken harnesses, rusted tools, things she couldn't identify. The windows were so dirty they barely let in light. Evelyn stood in the center of the disaster and tried to imagine it transformed. Desks arranged in rows, books on shelves, children's voices filling the space with questions and arguments and learning. It seemed impossible. "Looks pretty bad, huh?" She turned. A girl stood in the doorway, maybe 13, all knees and elbows, with dark hair in a braid and eyes that challenged before words were even spoken. "It's seen better days," Evelyn admitted. "I'm Rosa Ruiz. My mama said I had to come introduce myself and tell you I'm not afraid of work." She said it like quoting scripture she didn't quite believe. "So, I'm telling you." "Thank you, Rosa. I'm Miss Carter." "I know. Everyone knows." Rosa wandered into the space, kicking at debris. "You really think you can teach us? Like, actually teach?" "I'm going to try." "Why?" "Why not?" Rosa laughed, sharp, surprised. "That's not an answer." "Sure it is. You asked why I'd try something difficult. I'm asking why I wouldn't. What's the alternative? Give up before starting?" "Most people would." "I'm not most people." "Yeah." Rosa studied her with uncomfortable intensity. "I can see that. You're too tall." "Excuse me?" "Too tall for a lady. Ladies are supposed to be small and pretty and quiet. You're none of those things." Evelyn couldn't help it. She laughed. "You're very observant. My mama says I'm too honest, says it'll get me in trouble." "Your mama might be right, but honesty has value too." Rosa kicked at a particularly large pile of debris. "You need help cleaning this place?" "I'd appreciate it." "Okay, but I'm not doing it for free. You teach me stuff. I work. Deal?" "What kind of stuff?" "Everything. Reading faster, writing better, how to talk like you do, all proper and confident, how to make people listen instead of just waiting for me to shut up." "Smart girl. Ambitious too." "Deal. When can you start?" "Now's good." They worked until lunch, moving equipment, sweeping years of accumulated dirt, opening windows to let fresh air circulate. Rosa talked constantly, a stream of observations and questions that would have exhausted most people. But Evelyn found herself engaged. The girl was sharp, curious, and completely uninterested in being anything other than exactly who she was. "My papa says education is fine for boys, but girls need to focus on practical skills," Rosa said, attacking a stubborn pile of rat droppings with more violence than necessary. "Says I should learn cooking and sewing and how to manage a house." "Do you want to learn those things?" "Some. I like cooking, hate sewing, but I also want to know things, real things, how the world works, what's possible, why things happen the way they do." She looked up, defiant. "Is that wrong?" "No, it's human. My papa doesn't see it that way." "Then we'll have to show him differently." Evelyn leaned on her broom. "Rosa, can I be honest with you?" "You better be. I hate when adults lie and pretend it's protection." "Fair. Here's the truth. I don't know if I can teach you everything you want to learn. I'll probably make mistakes, probably miss things you need, but I promise I'll never tell you that wanting to know things is wrong. Your curiosity isn't a flaw. It's your greatest strength." Rosa's eyes got bright. She turned away quickly, attacking the next pile of debris with renewed focus. "Okay. Good. That's good." They worked in silence after that, but it was comfortable. Companionable, even. By evening, the schoolhouse looked marginally less like a disaster. They'd cleared the worst debris, swept the floors, cleaned the windows enough to actually see through. It would need more work, furniture, materials, actual organization, but it was a start. Dinner at the main house was organized chaos. Long tables, too many people, food past family style, while conversations overlapped and children ran between adults and someone's dog begged shamelessly for scraps. Evelyn felt overwhelmed within minutes. Mara appeared at her elbow. Breathe. Nobody expects you to remember names on day one. There are so many people. 18 adults, 14 children currently on the property, plus whoever's working distant sections. Mara guided her to a seat. You'll learn. Just eat, listen, don't commit to anything tonight. The food was simple but good. Beef, beans, fresh bread, vegetables from the garden. Evelyn ate while conversations flowed around her. Ranch talk mostly. Water rights, fence repairs, livestock health. But underneath the practical discussions, she caught glimpses of community. These people knew each other deeply, their strengths, their struggles, their history. It was nothing like Boston, where neighbors lived side by side for decades without ever really knowing each other. Here, privacy seemed less important than survival. You couldn't hide your problems when your neighbor might need to help solve them. Miss Carter, she looked up. Tom Henderson sat across from her, his wife Maria beside him. My boys will be at the schoolhouse Monday morning, he said. James is 12, Michael's 10. They can be difficult. I'll manage. See that you do. But his tone wasn't harsh. They need this. All these kids do, just don't know it yet. Maria leaned forward. You need anything for the school? You let me know. I can sew, mend, make basic supplies. Not fancy, but functional. Thank you. I'll take you up on that. The evening wore on. People gradually drifted away, children to bed, adults to finish evening chores. Evelyn helped clean up, learning the rhythm of clearing tables and washing dishes in a kitchen designed to feed dozens. Caleb appeared as she was drying the last plate. Walk you back to your place? I can manage. Didn't say you couldn't, offering anyway. They walked in silence through the darkening ranch. Lights glowed in windows. Somewhere a horse whinnied. The air smelled like dust and sage, and something she couldn't quite identify, but that felt like the territory itself. You did good today, Caleb said eventually. Meeting the parents, working with Rosa, holding your own at dinner, people notice that. Notice what? That you show up, that you don't pretend to be something you're not. He stopped at her door. That matters out here. Caleb, Evelyn turned to face him. That offer I made this morning, about teaching you to read, it stands. If you want it. His jaw tightened. Why? Because you want to learn and I can teach. It's not complicated. It is, though. You'll have all those kids to focus on, materials to create, a whole school to build from nothing. Why waste time on me? Teaching you wouldn't be wasted time, and honestly, she met his eyes. I think you'd be a better student than half those children. You already understand why it matters. He looked away toward the mountains dark against the sky. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. If I say yes, I need you to promise something. What? That you won't give up on me when it gets hard, when I'm slow or stupid or can't understand something that seems basic to you, that you won't get frustrated and quit. I won't. You don't know that. I do. Because I've been the person everyone gave up on, Caleb. I know what that feels like. I won't do it to someone else. He studied her face, searching for something. Whatever he found must have satisfied him because he nodded once, sharp. Okay, we try. But after the kids. After your regular teaching. I won't take time from them. Evenings then. After dinner when you're done with work. That'll be late sometimes. I'm aware. And you can't tell anyone, not yet. People find out, they'll... He trailed off. They'll what? Think less of me. A man my age who can't read, who needs a woman to teach him basic letters like a child. A man your age who's willing to learn is nothing to be ashamed of. You say that. They might think different. Evelyn understood. Pride was complicated out here, tied up in competence and self-sufficiency. Admitting need was dangerous. All right, we keep it private until you're ready. But Caleb? Eventually people will notice you can read. They'll ask how you learned. We'll deal with that when it happens. He touched his hat brim. Good night, Miss Carter. Evelyn, if we're going to spend evenings together, you might as well use my name. Evelyn, then? He said it carefully, testing it. Good night. He disappeared into the darkness, leaving her standing at her door with her heart doing something complicated in her chest. The next 3 days were a blur of hard work. Evelyn cleaned, organized, and begged materials from anyone who'd listen. Maria Henderson sewed basic cushions for the benches Tom and another man built. Someone donated slate boards. Another family contributed chalk and paper. Slowly, impossibly, the schoolhouse took shape. The children helped, which was both useful and chaotic. Rosa became her unofficial assistant, organizing the younger kids and translating when Evelyn's instructions got too complicated. James and Michael Henderson showed up to supervise, which mostly meant climbing on things they shouldn't and asking endless questions about Boston. Is it true buildings touch the sky? Not quite, James, but they're tall. Taller than anything here? Much taller. Why? Because there are more people and less space, so they build up instead of out. Michael wrinkled his nose. That sounds terrible. Sometimes it was. The younger children, ranging from 5 to 8, were harder to manage. They had the attention span of mayflies and an incredible talent for creating chaos from nothing. But they were also curious, funny, and occasionally surprisingly insightful. A little girl named Annie asked, "How many letters are there?" 26. That's all? That seems like not very many. Those 26 letters can make infinite words. What's infinite? More than you can count. Annie's eyes went wide. That's a lot of words. It is. I want to know all of them. Evelyn smiled. Then we'll start teaching you Monday. By Sunday evening, the schoolhouse was ready. Not perfect, nowhere close, but functional. Desks arranged in rough rows, slates waiting, a small collection of books on a shelf Caleb had built in the corner. Evelyn stood in the center and tried not to think about how much could go wrong. Looks good. She turned. Caleb leaned against the doorframe, hat in hand. It looks like a desperate attempt to create civilization from salvage. Same thing. He walked the perimeter, checking the bench's stability. Kids will tear through here like a storm, but you built something that'll hold. That's what matters. I hope you're right. Nervous? Terrified. He turned to face her. Good. Means you care. People who aren't nervous usually fail because they don't take it serious enough. Comforting. Not trying to comfort, trying to prepare. He moved closer. You're going to have hard days, Evelyn. Days when nothing works, when kids fight you, when parents complain. Days when you question everything. But you're also going to have moments, small ones, easy to miss, when something connects. When a kid reads their first word, or understands a concept they've been fighting, or asks a question that shows they're actually thinking. Those moments are what you hold on to. You sound like you know from experience. Learning to do anything worth doing is hard. Teaching yourself to be better than you were, that's the hardest thing there is. He paused. Speaking of which, you still willing to teach me? Every evening after dinner, my offer stands. Then I'll be here tomorrow night. After the kids go home, after dinner, after chores, probably close to 8, I'll be ready. He nodded, started to leave, then stopped. Evelyn, thank you for not making this feel like charity. It's not charity, it's an exchange. I teach you to read. You teach me how to survive out here. Seems fair. A smile ghosted across his face. Deal. That night, Evelyn barely slept. She kept running through lesson plans, imagining scenarios, preparing for disaster. By dawn, she was exhausted and wired in equal measure. The first students arrived at 8 o'clock Monday morning. Rosa came first, pulling 2 younger kids with her, then the Henderson boys with their sister trailing behind. More children appeared gradually, shy ones, bold ones who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. By 8:30, Evelyn had 14 children, ranging from 5 to 13, crowded into the schoolhouse, all staring at her with varying degrees of curiosity and suspicion. She stood at the front of the room and felt her carefully prepared opening speech evaporate. All right, she said instead. Who here can read? Rosa's hand shot up. 2 others raised theirs tentatively. Who wants to learn? Slower response this time. About half. Who's here because their parents made them come? Immediate forest of hands. Even Rosa's went up halfway. Evelyn laughed. She couldn't help it. Okay, fair enough. Here's the truth. I can't make you want to learn. I can make you show up, make you do the work, make you try. But actually caring, that's on you. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to teach you letters, words, numbers, ideas. Some of it will be boring, some will be hard, some you'll hate. But some of it, if you let it, will be the most powerful thing you ever learn. Because reading gives you access to every idea anyone's ever had. Writing lets you put your ideas into the world, and thinking clearly lets you make choices instead of just reacting. Those are tools. Whether you use them or not, that's up to you. The room was silent. Then James Henderson raised his hand. Yes? What if we're bad at it? Then you'll practice until you're better. What's the alternative? Stay bad at it forever? I guess not. Right, so let's start. She began with letters. The basics, A through Z, sounds and shapes, building blocks of everything else. Some kids caught on immediately, others struggled. Michael Henderson kept mixing up B and D no matter how many times she explained. Little Annie wanted to know why letters made the sounds they did instead of different sounds. Because that's the rule. But who made the rule? People. A long time ago. Could we change it? Technically, yes, but then nobody could understand each other. Why not? Evelyn took a breath. Because language works by agreement. We all agree that this symbol makes this sound, so when we see it, we know what it means. If everyone changed the rules differently, it would be chaos. Annie thought about that. Okay, that makes sense. By lunch, Evelyn's voice was hoarse and her head pounded. The children scattered to eat and she collapsed onto a bench. Rosa appeared with water. You did good. I barely survived. Same thing, first day. Rosa sat beside her. They like you, though, I can tell. How? They're loud. If they didn't like you, they'd be quiet and obedient. Loud means they're comfortable enough to be themselves. That's actually helpful. Thank you. You're welcome. Also, Michael's never going to get B and D straight. He sees letters backwards. I think his brain's just built different. Evelyn sat up. Wait, you've noticed that? Everyone has. He's not stupid, Miss Carter. He just can't make letters go the right direction. This was information Evelyn needed. What else should I know? About the other kids? Rosa considered. James acts tough, but he's scared of being wrong. If he gets frustrated, he'll shut down completely. You have to catch him before that happens. Annie's smarter than everyone gives her credit for, but she needs to understand why things work, not just that they work. The little ones, they're fine as long as you keep them moving. Make them sit still too long and they'll revolt. You're very observant. I pay attention. Most adults don't. I do. Rosa smiled. Yeah, I'm starting to see that. The afternoon was more of the same. Teaching, correcting, encouraging, managing chaos. By the time 3 o'clock arrived and parents came to collect their children, Evelyn was completely drained. But she'd survived day 1. Tom Henderson stopped at the door. How'd they do? Better than I expected. Your boys are smart. They give you trouble? Some, but nothing I couldn't handle. He nodded approval. Tomorrow then. Parents trickled in, collecting children, asking quiet questions about progress. Evelyn answered honestly. It was one day, too early to assess anything meaningful, but they'd made a start. By 6 o'clock, the schoolhouse was empty and silent. Evelyn locked up and walked to the main house for dinner, every muscle screaming. She ate mechanically, barely tasting food, while conversations flowed around her. Then Caleb appeared at her elbow. Still willing? She looked up at him, this man who worked brutal hours and still wanted to learn, who was willing to risk pride for knowledge. My place. Give me 20 minutes to clean up. He nodded and disappeared. Evelyn finished dinner, helped clean up on autopilot, then walked to her small house. She lit lamps, pulled out her simplest books, and tried to figure out where to even start teaching a 35-year-old man to read. The knock came at exactly 8. Caleb stood in her doorway, hat in hand, looking more nervous than she'd ever seen him. Come in. He stepped inside, taking in the small space, the books, the papers, the evidence of her life. Where do we start? Letters, same place as everyone else? She gestured to the table. Sit. He sat. And Evelyn Carter, failed mail-order bride turned frontier teacher, began teaching a ranch foreman the alphabet by lamplight while the desert breathed outside and the future hung suspended between them like something fragile and precious and entirely uncertain. Caleb stared at the paper like it might bite him. "Just letters," Evelyn said quietly. "A through Z. That's all we're doing tonight. I know some of them already. A, B, C." He trailed off, uncertain. "Show me." He picked up the pencil awkwardly, gripping it like a tool instead of an instrument. His hand moved slowly across the page, forming shapes that were recognizable but rough. A, B, C, D. He stopped at E, frowning. "Is that right?" "Close. The middle line needs to be shorter." She didn't reach for his hand, didn't correct him physically, just showed him on her own paper. "Like this." He tried again. Better. They worked through the alphabet twice. Caleb's frustration built with each letter that didn't come easily, his jaw tightening, shoulders rigid. When he botched M for the third time, he threw the pencil down. "This is stupid. I'm too old for this." "You're not. Kids learn this in weeks. I've been at it an hour and can barely write my own name legibly." Evelyn picked up the pencil and handed it back. Children learn differently than adults. Their brains absorb patterns faster, but they don't understand context or meaning the way you do. You're not slow, Caleb. You're learning a completely different way. That takes time. "How much time?" "I don't know. Everyone's different." He rubbed his face, exhausted. Maybe this was a mistake. It's been one night, and I already want to quit. "But you won't." She met his eyes. "Because you're not someone who quits when things get hard. That's not who you are." He stared at her for a long moment. Then he picked up the pencil. Again. They worked until past 9. By the end, Caleb could write the full alphabet without reference, though some letters still came out shaky. It wasn't mastery, but it was progress. "Tomorrow we start on sounds," Evelyn said as he stood to leave. "Sounds? How letters combine to make words. It's going to be harder." "Of course it is." But there was something almost like humor in his voice. "Same time?" "Same time." He paused at the door. "Thank you for your patience. Thank you for trusting me." After he left, Evelyn sat at the table and stared at the papers covered in Caleb's rough letters. There was something intimate about teaching someone to read, watching them struggle with basics, seeing their frustration and determination, being trusted with their vulnerability. It felt different than teaching the children. More personal, more dangerous. She shook off the thought and went to bed. The next weeks fell into a rhythm that was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. Days with the children were chaos barely contained, lessons interrupted by arguments, questions that spiraled into tangents, attention spans that evaporated like water in the desert heat. But slowly, impossibly, progress appeared. Annie learned to read simple words and immediately started reading everything she could find. Michael still struggled with letters but showed a remarkable aptitude for numbers. James asked questions that showed he was actually thinking about what he learned, not just memorizing. Rosa became her unofficial teaching assistant, helping younger students and pushing Evelyn to go deeper with the older ones. "They're ready for more," Rosa insisted one afternoon after school. "Real books, not just primers. They barely know 100 words. So teach them more." "They're bored, Miss Carter. Bored students quit." Rosa was right. Evelyn started incorporating actual literature, simple passages at first, then longer pieces. She read aloud while students followed along, stopping to explain unfamiliar words. The transformation was immediate. Suddenly reading wasn't just an exercise, it was a doorway. But not everyone adapted easily. Miguel Ruiz, Rosa's younger brother, fought every lesson. He was 10, bright as hell, and absolutely convinced that education was worthless for someone who'd spend his life working land. "Why do I need to read?" he demanded one morning, throwing down his slate. "I'm going to be a rancher like my papa. Ranchers don't need books." "Your papa can read," Evelyn said calmly. "Barely. And he does fine without it." "Does he? Or does he rely on other people to read contracts, verify agreements, handle anything requiring documentation?" Miguel's jaw set stubbornly. "That's different." "How?" "Because—" He stopped, frustrated. "I don't know. It just is." Evelyn crouched beside his desk. "Miguel, I'm not saying you have to love reading. I'm saying you deserve the choice. Right now, you're dependent on others for information. Learning to read means you control that access. Nobody can lie to you about what a contract says, or what opportunities exist, or what the world contains beyond what you can see directly. That's power. Whether you use it or not, that's up to you. He stared at his slate. It's hard. Yes. And I'm slow at it. You're learning. That's different than slow. James reads faster. James has been practicing longer and his brain processes written language differently than yours. But you're better at mathematics than anyone in this room. Everyone has different strengths, Miguel. The goal isn't to be best at everything. It's to be competent enough to have choices. He picked up his pencil. Fine. But if this ends up being useless, I'm going to remind you. Deal. The evenings with Caleb were different, quieter, more focused, and increasingly complicated in ways Evelyn tried not to examine too closely. He progressed faster than she expected. Within 2 weeks, he could sound out simple words. Within a month, he was reading short sentences, stumbling but determined. His handwriting remained rough, but it was legible, and his hunger for knowledge was relentless. What's this word? He'd ask, pointing. Circumstance. Meaning. The conditions or facts connected to an event. Context. He'd repeat it, testing it. Circumstance. Then he'd use it in a sentence, making sure he understood. The circumstance of drought changes how we manage water. Exactly. Their sessions stretched longer as he improved. An hour became 2. Sometimes Evelyn would look up and realize it was past 10, that Caleb had been working since before dawn and was still pushing himself to learn more. We should stop, she'd say. You're exhausted. 1 more page. Caleb, please. She never could refuse him. One night about 6 weeks in, he brought a book to their session, a worn copy of something she didn't recognize. Found this in the bunkhouse, he said, setting it on the table. One of the hands left it behind years ago. I've been carrying it around ever since, wanting to know what was inside. Evelyn picked it up. Essays by Emerson. The same author she'd been reading the night Gerald dismissed her. You want to start with this? Is it too hard? She flipped through pages. The language was dense, philosophical, challenging even for experienced readers. It's not easy reading, Caleb. I didn't ask if it was easy. I asked if it was too hard. For where you are now? Probably. But we can work toward it, use it as a goal. How long? I don't know, months maybe. You'd need to build vocabulary, get comfortable with complex sentence structure, develop stamina for sustained reading. He took the book back, running his hand over the cover. I want to understand it, not just read the words, understand what he's actually saying. Why this book specifically? Caleb was quiet for a moment. Because the man who left it behind said it changed how he thought about the world, said it gave him language for ideas he'd always felt but couldn't express. I want that. I want to know what I'm capable of thinking if I have the right words. Something in Evelyn's chest tightened. Then we'll get you there. Promise? I promise. His smile was brief but genuine. All right then. Where do we start tonight? They fell into new patterns. Caleb would read aloud while Evelyn corrected pronunciation and explained unfamiliar terms. Then they'd discuss what he'd read, testing his comprehension. He was better at understanding than she expected. His mind worked differently than hers, more concrete, but equally sharp. This part about self-reliance, he said one night, pointing to a passage. Emerson's saying trust yourself over what society tells you, right? Essentially, yes. That's harder than it sounds. Why? Because society, people, they have expectations, ways things are supposed to be done. Going against that has consequences. Evelyn thought about Mrs. Henderson's dining room, about Gerald's dismissal, about every time she'd been told she was too much. Yes, it does. You've experienced that, constantly. But you keep doing it anyway, being yourself. What's the alternative? Spend my whole life pretending to be someone else? Most people do exactly that. Then most people are cowards. She said it flatly, without judgment. Present company excluded. He looked at her then, really looked, the way he sometimes did when he thought she wasn't paying attention. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone more polished, refined, someone who'd look down on people like me. People like you? Uneducated, rough, limited. You're none of those things. Untaught isn't the same as uneducated, rough doesn't mean unsophisticated, and limited is just a failure of imagination. She paused. Anyone who'd look down on you for wanting to learn is someone whose opinion doesn't matter. Even if that someone is yourself? The question landed hard. Especially then. Caleb went back to reading, but something had shifted between them. The air felt heavier, charged with things neither of them was saying. By October, the school had found its rhythm. Children arrived mostly on time, mostly prepared. Reading levels were improving across the board. Even Miguel had stopped fighting every lesson, though he still complained regularly. Parents began asking Evelyn to teach evening classes for adults. Nothing formal, just basic literacy, arithmetic, skills they'd never learned. She agreed, adding 2 nights a week to her already packed schedule, which meant less time for Caleb. "We can adjust," he said when she explained. "I can practice on my own more, meet with you less frequently." "I don't want to do that." "Why not? You'll be exhausted. Teaching all day, then adults twice a week, then me on top of that." "I said I don't want to." She said it too sharply, then softened. "Your progress matters, Caleb. I'm not cutting it short." My progress or teaching me? The question was too close to something Evelyn wasn't ready to examine. Both. He studied her face. "All right, we keep going, but you tell me if it's too much." "I will." She wouldn't. They both knew it. The adult classes were different than teaching children. These were people who'd lived entire lives without literacy, who carried shame about their ignorance, who needed education but feared judgment. Evelyn approached it carefully. No condescension, no pity, just practical instruction delivered with respect. Maria Henderson attended, surprising everyone, including her husband. She was quiet, determined, and frustrated by how slowly she progressed. "I feel stupid," she admitted one night after class. "You're not stupid. You're learning something new. That's always hard." "My daughter reads better than I do." "Because she started younger. You're fighting decades of not having access to education. Give yourself credit for trying now." Maria's eyes watered. "My mother couldn't read. Her mother couldn't read. I don't want that for my daughter." "Then you're breaking a pattern. That takes courage." The older woman nodded, gathering her materials. "Thank you, Miss Carter, for not making me feel small." After she left, Evelyn sat in the empty schoolhouse and felt the weight of what she'd taken on. These weren't just lessons. They were life changes. Every person she taught to read gained access to information, opportunity, power. That was terrifying and humbling in equal measure. "Long night?" She looked up. Caleb stood in the doorway, lamp in hand, just thinking. About? Responsibility. Impact. Whether I'm actually helping or just creating new problems. He came inside, setting the lamp on her desk. Why would teaching create problems? Because knowledge changes people. Once you can read, you can't unlearn it. Once you understand what's possible, you can't go back to not knowing. That's power, but it's also burden. What if people were happier before? What if I'm making their lives harder? That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard you say. She blinked. Excuse me? Evelyn, you're not forcing anyone to learn. Every person in that adult class chose to be there. Every child's parents agreed to send them to school. Nobody's being compelled. He pulled up a chair. And yeah, knowledge complicates things. But ignorance doesn't equal happiness. It equals dependence. People deserve the choice. Even if making that choice is painful? Especially then. He leaned forward. You taught me to read. You know what that's changed? Everything. How I see the world, how I think about my life, what I believe is possible for myself. Is it harder? Sometimes. But it's also better. More honest. More mine. You gave me that. Don't you dare apologize for it. Evelyn's throat tightened. I'm not apologizing. Good. Because you're changing lives here. Real, measurable change. That's worth the complication. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Evelyn said, You want to read tonight? Thought you were tired. I am, but I'm also restless. Reading helps. All right then. He pulled out the Emerson, never far from reach these days. Where were we? They read until midnight, voices quiet in the lamplight, while the ranch settled around them and the November cold crept through the walls. By winter, something was becoming obvious that Evelyn tried desperately to ignore. She was falling for Caleb Turner. It wasn't sudden or dramatic. It was gradual, built from evenings spent teaching him, from watching his determination, from conversations that went deeper than surface pleasantries. It was in the way he listened when she talked, like her words actually mattered. The way he challenged her when he disagreed instead of just accepting her authority. The way he'd started leaving books he thought she'd like at her door, no note necessary. It was dangerous and stupid and completely inappropriate. She was the teacher. He was the student. There was a power imbalance that made any romantic feeling questionable at best. And beyond that, she had no idea if he felt anything beyond gratitude and friendship. Reading affection into professional courtesy was a recipe for disaster, so she buried it, focused on teaching, on the school, on maintaining appropriate boundaries, until the night Caleb broke them. It was early December, brutally cold. They'd been reading for hours, working through a particularly dense section of Emerson. Caleb was frustrated. The language was fighting him, meaning staying just out of reach. "I don't understand," he said for the third time. "What is he actually saying here?" He's saying that society tries to make everyone conform, but real integrity comes from trusting your own sense of what's right. But how do you know what's right if you can't trust external guidance? You feel it, internal compass, instinct shaped by thought and experience. That sounds like an excuse to do whatever you want. Not whatever you want. What aligns with your core values? There's a difference. Caleb threw the book onto the table. This is impossible. The words make sense individually, but together they're just noise. You're tired. We should stop. I don't want to stop. I want to understand. Caleb, why is this so hard for me? His frustration finally boiled over. I can manage an entire ranch, coordinate dozens of people, solve complex logistical problems. But reading a simple essay defeats me. What's wrong with my brain? Nothing is wrong with your brain. You're learning complex abstract thinking through written language for the first time. That takes time. How much time? I don't know. Months? Years? Never? Stop. Evelyn stood, moved around the table. You're spiraling. You've made incredible progress in 4 months. You're reading at a level most people take years to reach. You're being too hard on yourself. I'm being realistic. You're being cruel to yourself. She was standing close now, closer than appropriate. Caleb, you're one of the smartest people I know. The fact that you're struggling with philosophical texts doesn't change that. It just means you need more time and practice. That's all. He looked up at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. You really believe that? Yes? Why? Because I see you. Not just the parts that are easy or accomplished, but all of it. The struggle, the determination, the growth. You're remarkable, Caleb. I wish you could see that. The silence stretched between them, taut as wire. Then Caleb stood. He was taller than her by a few inches, close enough that she could feel the heat from his body. His hand came up, hesitated, then touched her face with a gentleness that broke something inside her. Evelyn. His voice was rough. I need to tell you something. Don't. Why not? Because I'm your teacher. Because there's a power dynamic that makes this complicated. Because I don't know if what you're feeling is real or just gratitude mixed with proximity. You think I don't know the difference between gratitude and this? His thumb traced her cheekbone. I'm 35 years old. I've felt gratitude before. This isn't that. Then what is it? I don't have words for it yet. You're teaching me those. He stepped back, giving her space. But I know what I feel, and I know it's not going away just because it's inconvenient or complicated. Evelyn's heart was pounding. We can't do this. Why not? Because you're my student. That's not what this is. The teaching. That's separate. This is two people who've spent months getting to know each other, who respect each other, who want more than what they currently have. And if it doesn't work, if we try this and it fails, then what happens to the teaching, to your education? Then we figure it out like adults. He met her eyes steadily. I'm not asking for guarantees, Evelyn. I'm asking for honesty. Do you feel what I feel? She should lie. Should protect them both from this complication. Should maintain professional boundaries and appropriate distance. Instead, she said, yes. The word hung between them. Then we have a choice, Caleb said quietly. We can ignore it and pretend it's not real, or we can acknowledge it and see where it goes. But either way, I need you to know, I don't just want knowledge from you anymore. I want a life, with you in it. Evelyn couldn't breathe. This man, this rough, determined, impossibly honest man, was offering her everything she'd never let herself want. Partnership, possibility, a future built on choice instead of circumstance. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I. What if I'm not what you think I am? What if the reality doesn't match what you've built up in your head? Evelyn, I've spent nearly 5 months watching you teach children who fight you, manage parents who doubt you, create something from nothing, and never once quit or compromise who you are. I know exactly who you are. The question is whether you're willing to let yourself want this. And that was the crux of it, wasn't it? Evelyn had spent so long being told she was too much, too difficult, too herself. She'd built walls around wanting anything beyond survival. The idea of letting someone in, really in, was terrifying. But Caleb wasn't asking her to be smaller. He was asking her to be more. I don't know how to do this, she said. Neither do I. But we could learn together. He held out his hand, the same hand that had struggled to hold a pencil 4 months ago, that had written letters until his fingers cramped, that had turned pages seeking understanding. What do you say? Evelyn looked at his hand, rough and scarred and steady. Then she took it. His fingers closed around hers, warm and certain. For a long moment, they just stood there, hands clasped, while everything they weren't saying filled the space between them. So now what? Evelyn asked. I don't know. Court you, I guess, whatever that means out here. I have no idea what that means anywhere. Then we make it up as we go. He squeezed her hand gently. Can I see you tomorrow? Not for teaching, just to see you? Yes. Okay. He smiled, a real smile, open and a little nervous. Okay, I'll figure something out. He left, and Evelyn sat down hard on the nearest chair. What the hell had she just agreed to? Outside, winter wind rattled the windows, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called. The ranch breathed around her, alive and indifferent to her panic. She'd spent her whole life trying to fit into spaces that didn't want her, trying to be acceptable, trying to survive rejection. And now here was a man offering acceptance, not despite who she was, but because of it. It was the most terrifying thing that had ever happened to her. It was also the most honest. Evelyn stood, extinguished the lamp, and walked back to her small house under a sky dense with stars. Tomorrow would bring complications, questions, uncertainties. But tonight she let herself feel something she hadn't allowed in years. Hope. Caleb showed up the next afternoon with 2 horses and no plan. I thought we could ride out to the eastern section, he said, looking uncomfortable in a way Evelyn had never seen him. There's a spot I want to show you, if you're interested. She was in the middle of grading assignments, her small house covered in papers. Now? If now works. If not, we can... Now works. She set down her pencil too quickly, then tried to look casual about it. Just let me change into something more practical. She emerged 5 minutes later in her riding dress, the one she'd worn exactly twice since arriving. Caleb helped her onto the horse, his hands lingering a moment longer than necessary at her waist. They rode in silence for the first mile, the awkwardness between them thick enough to cut. This was different than their evening sessions. Those had structure, purpose, boundaries. This was just 2 people trying to figure out what they were to each other without the safety of books between them. So, Evelyn said finally, do you do this often? Take women riding to mysterious eastern sections? Never, actually. You're the first. Should I be honored or concerned? Probably both. He glanced at her. I'm not good at this. At what? Courting. Talking without a specific purpose. Being anything other than straightforward and practical. I'm not exactly experienced either, My last attempt at romance ended with me sitting at a train depot with $200 and nowhere to go. That wasn't romance. That was a business transaction that fell through. Fair point. They rode further, the landscape opening up around them. The ranch land here was different, more rugged, less cultivated. Rock formations jutted up like broken teeth, and the vegetation grew sparse and determined. There, Caleb said, pointing. She followed his gesture and saw it, a spot where the land dropped away slightly, creating a natural overlook. Below, a dry riverbed cut through the terrain, and beyond that the desert stretched to mountains that looked blue in the distance. They dismounted, and Caleb spread a blanket he'd brought, along with canteen and some bread wrapped in cloth. He'd planned this. The thought made something warm bloom in Evelyn's chest. "I come here sometimes," he said, sitting, "when I need to think, or when thinking's not working and I just need space." Evelyn sat beside him, careful to maintain a respectable distance. "It's beautiful. It's honest. No pretense out here. Things are what they are. Hard land, clear sky, survival on its own terms." He paused. "Reminds me of you, actually." "I remind you of a desert?" "You remind me of something that doesn't apologize for being exactly what it is, that exists on its own terms regardless of whether people approve." He looked at her. "That's rare, Evelyn. Most people spend their whole lives trying to be acceptable. You never learned how." "I learned. I just wasn't any good at it." "Or you were smart enough to realize it wasn't worth the cost." She pulled her knees up, resting her chin on them. "Can I ask you something? When did you know that you felt whatever this is?" Caleb was quiet for a moment, considering. "Not one moment, a series of them. The first time you corrected me without making me feel stupid. The night you told me my curiosity wasn't shameful. Every time you pushed me to think harder instead of accepting easy answers. The way you look when you're reading, completely absorbed, like the rest of the world disappears." He picked up a rock, turned it in his hand. "But the moment I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore? 3 weeks ago. You were teaching Maria Henderson, and she was frustrated to the point of tears. You sat with her, patient as anything, and said, 'You're not behind, Maria. You're exactly where you need to be.' And I thought, that's the person I want to build a life with. Someone who sees people's worth before their limitations." Evelyn's throat tightened. "That's a lot to live up to." "I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to be you. What if me is difficult and stubborn and occasionally impossible to deal with? Then we'll fight sometimes. I'd rather fight with you than have easy peace with someone else." She turned to look at him fully. "You really mean that?" "I don't say things I don't mean. Haven't learned how to lie politely yet. You haven't taught me that." "I never will." "Good." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sharing the bread and water while the sun tracked across the sky. It was easy in a way Evelyn hadn't expected. No pressure to perform or impress, just two people existing in the same space. "So what happens now?" she asked eventually. "With us, I mean. How does this work out here?" "However we want it to, I guess. There's no rule book for frontier romance." "Is that what this is? Romance?" "Feels like it to me. Unless you have a different word for it." "I don't, I'm just trying to understand what we're doing." Caleb set down his canteen. "Evelyn, I'm 35 years old. I've been alone most of my adult life by choice because I never met anyone who made me want to change that. You make me want to change it. I want to know what you think about things. I want to hear you argue with me when I'm wrong. I want to watch you teach because it's the most alive I've ever seen another person. And I want to see if we can build something together that's better than what we have separately." He met her eyes. "That's what I'm doing." "What are you doing?" "Trying not to panic." "That's honest, at least." "I'm serious. Every relationship I've ever attempted has ended badly. I'm not good at being what people need. I'm too independent, too opinionated, too everything. For the wrong people, maybe. But I don't want you to be different. I want you to be more yourself. If that means independent and opinionated, fine. I can handle that. You say that now, Evelyn." He shifted closer. "I spent 4 months watching you build a school from nothing. I've seen you frustrated, exhausted, angry, disappointed. I've seen you at your worst, and it made me respect you more, not less. I'm not operating under illusions here. I know who you are. The question is whether you're brave enough to let yourself have this." She wanted to argue, to list all the reasons this was a bad idea, but sitting there with him, watching the desert stretch endlessly before them, she couldn't find the words. Because he was right. The fear wasn't about whether it would work. It was about whether she'd let herself try. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay, what?" "Okay, we try this. Whatever this is. But Caleb, I need you to promise me something." "What?" "That if it doesn't work, if we realize we're better as friends or teacher and student or whatever, that we'll be honest about it. That we won't drag it out or try to force something that isn't there. I can handle failure. I can't handle dishonesty." "Deal." Same promise back at you. "Agreed." He held out his hand and she shook it, formal and slightly ridiculous. Then they both started laughing, at the absurdity of negotiating romance like a business contract, at the awkwardness of it all, at themselves. "We're terrible at this," Evelyn said between laughs. "Absolutely horrible." "Should we practice?" "Probably." He was still holding her hand. "How?" "I have no idea." "Me neither." They sat there grinning at each other like idiots until Caleb leaned forward and kissed her, brief, careful, asking permission even as he took it. Evelyn kissed him back. It wasn't perfect or practiced or anything resembling romantic literature. It was tentative and slightly awkward and absolutely real. And when they pulled apart, both breathing a little harder, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. Not protected or sheltered, but safe to be exactly who she was with someone who wanted that instead of some edited version. "So," Caleb said, his voice rough, "that's courting, I guess." "I guess so." They rode back to the ranch as the sun set, talking about everything and nothing. By the time they arrived, Evelyn's face hurt from smiling and her chest felt lighter than it had in months. Mara was waiting on the main house porch, arms crossed, expression knowing. "Have a nice ride?" "Very nice, thank you," Evelyn said, trying for casual. "Uh-huh." Mara's eyes moved between them. "Caleb, the north fence needs checking tomorrow. Evelyn, I need to discuss spring curriculum with you. Both of you should probably get some sleep tonight. You look tired." Translation: "I know exactly what's happening and we'll talk about it later." Caleb helped Evelyn down from her horse, his hands lingering again. "Tomorrow evening? For reading?" "And talking," Evelyn said. "We should probably practice that too." Agreed. He left, and Evelyn headed to her house, acutely aware of Mara's eyes on her back. She made it inside before the woman appeared at her door. "We going to talk about this?" Mara asked without preamble. "About what?" "Don't play stupid. It doesn't suit you. You and Caleb." Evelyn sighed. "Is it that obvious?" "To anyone with eyes, yes. To anyone who knows either of you, absolutely." Mara came inside uninvited, closing the door behind her. "I'm not here to interfere. What you do with your personal life is your business, but I need to know it won't affect the school." "It won't." "You sure about that? Because if this goes badly, you'll still be teaching here and he'll still be foreman. Can you handle that?" "I don't know, but we agreed to be honest about it if things don't work." "And you trust him to keep that agreement?" "Yes." Mara studied her for a long moment. "All right then. For what it's worth, I think you're good for each other. He's been different since you arrived. More engaged, more curious about things beyond the ranch, and you've been less armored, like you're actually letting yourself exist here instead of just surviving." "I didn't realize I was that transparent." "You're not, but I pay attention." Mara moved toward the door. "One more thing, people will talk. Some will approve, some won't. The town folks especially will have opinions about the educated Eastern woman and the ranch foreman. You ready for that?" "Does it matter if I'm ready?" "No, it'll happen regardless, but knowing it's coming helps." After Mara left, Evelyn sat at her table and tried to process the day. This morning she'd been a teacher focused solely on education. Tonight she was a woman in a relationship, or the beginning of one, with a man who made her feel things she'd forgotten she was capable of feeling. It was terrifying. It was also the most honest thing she'd done in years. The next weeks fell into a new rhythm, Days teaching, evenings with Caleb, sometimes reading, sometimes talking, sometimes just existing together in comfortable silence. They were careful in public, maintaining professional distance, but in private, they were learning each other. Evelyn discovered that Caleb was funny in a dry, understated way, that he had strong opinions about land management and would argue them passionately, that he loved thunderstorms and hated being idle, that he was patient with everything except himself. Caleb learned that Evelyn talked in her sleep sometimes, muttering about lesson plans, that she had a temper, but it burned hot and fast, never lingering, that she needed solitude the way some people needed company, and he respected that instead of taking it personally. They fought occasionally, sharp disagreements about philosophy or politics or how to handle difficult students, but they fought honestly, neither of them backing down until they'd worked through to understanding. "You're impossible," Evelyn said one night, after a particularly heated debate about whether education should focus on practical skills or theoretical knowledge. "So are you. That's why this works." "Does it work? We just spent an hour arguing." "Yeah, and neither of us had to pretend to agree just to keep peace. I call that working." She couldn't argue with that logic. By February, their relationship had settled into something that felt sustainable. Not perfect, they still stumbled through moments of uncertainty and miscommunication, but real. Then Gerald Whitmore showed up at the ranch. Evelyn was teaching when Mara appeared at the schoolhouse door, her expression grim. "You have a visitor from town." Evelyn's stomach dropped. "Who?" "See for yourself." She dismissed the students early and walked to the main house, where Gerald stood in the parlor looking exactly as uncomfortable as he deserved to be. "Miss Carter?" "Mr. Whitmore." He looked older than she remembered, more worn. "I came to apologize." "After 5 months?" "I know it's late, but I've been thinking about how I treated you, and it wasn't right. You deserved better." Evelyn crossed her arms. "What changed? Why apologize now?" "I heard about what you're doing here. The school, the teaching. People in town are talking about how ranch children are learning to read, how you're teaching adults too. And I realized I was a fool. I wanted someone decorative and dismissed someone valuable. That was my mistake." "Yes, it was." He cleared his throat. "I'd like to make it right. If you'd be willing to return to town, I'd be honored to resume our arrangement, properly this time, with the respect you deserve." The silence that followed was profound. Then Evelyn started laughing. She couldn't help it, the absurdity of it, the timing, the complete misunderstanding of who she was and what she wanted. "You think I want to return to town? To marry you? After you dismissed me like a failed business transaction? I know I handled it badly. Gerald, you sent me away with $200 in 3 days' notice because I was too educated and too opinionated for your taste. Now you want me back because I'm successful. That's not respect. That's opportunism." "Miss Carter, I'm not interested. In you, in town, in any life that requires me to be smaller than I am. I have a home here, work that matters, people who value me as I am. Why would I give that up for someone who only wants me now that other people approve?" Gerald's face reddened. "You're choosing ranch work over civilization? Over a proper life?" "I'm choosing authenticity over performance. That's more civilized than anything your town offers." He left shortly after, angry and confused. Evelyn watched him ride away and felt nothing but relief. Caleb found her on the porch an hour later. "Heard you had a visitor." "Gerald wanted me back. I declined." "How'd he take it?" "Poorly, but I don't really care." She turned to face him. "He thought I'd jump at the chance to leave here, like this was temporary, something I was enduring until something better came along." "Is it?" "No. This is my life, Caleb, not a placeholder or a backup plan. This." He pulled her close, his chin resting on top of her head. "Good. Because I have plans for this life, and they include you." "What kind of plans?" "The permanent kind." He pulled back enough to see her face. "Marry me." Evelyn's brain stuttered. "What?" "Marry me. Build a life here, with me, doing exactly what we're already doing, but officially. Be my partner in everything, not just evening reading sessions." "Caleb, we've been together 4 months. 5. And I've known since month 2 that this was what I wanted. I'm just finally brave enough to ask." He held her gaze steadily. I'm not saying we have to do it tomorrow. Take time, think about it, but I need you to know that's where I'm headed, and I'm hoping you're headed there too." Evelyn's heart was hammering. Marriage. The thing she'd come west seeking and then fled from when it proved hollow. But this wasn't Gerald's offer of respectability and restraint. This was partnership, choice, building something together instead of fitting into something pre-made. "I need time," she said. "Take it. And I need to know this isn't just about gratitude or proximity, that you're not confusing appreciation for my teaching with actual love. Evelyn, I love who you are when you're teaching. I love who you are when you're frustrated with students. I love who you are when you're reading alone and think nobody's watching. I love your stubbornness and your intelligence and the way you refuse to apologize for taking up space. That's not gratitude. That's knowing exactly who I want to spend my life with." "You're sure?" "Completely. But you don't have to be. Not yet. Just think about it." She nodded, unable to speak around the emotion clogging her throat. They stood together on the porch while the ranch moved around them, children playing, adults working, life continuing in its messy, complicated way. And Evelyn let herself imagine it. A future here. Marriage to this man who saw her clearly and wanted her anyway. Children, maybe. Or maybe just the school. A life built on choice and honesty instead of compromise and performance. It was terrifying. It was also everything she'd never let herself want. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "That's all I'm asking." That night, Evelyn sat with her journals and actually examined what she wanted. Not what was practical or expected or safe. What she wanted. She wanted Caleb. Wanted the life they were building together. Wanted to wake up every day choosing partnership instead of surviving alone. Wanted to teach their community and raise children in a place that valued knowledge and growth. Wanted to grow old with someone who challenged her and respected her in equal measure. The fear was still there, fear of failure, of disappointment, of not being enough. But underneath it was something stronger. Certainty. She found Caleb the next morning before school started. He was checking fence lines, methodical and focused. "Yes," she said without preamble. He turned. "Yes, what?" "Yes, I'll marry you. Not because it's practical or expected or the safe choice. Because I want to build a life with you. Because you make me better without making me smaller. Because I love you, even though I'm terrified of what that means." The smile that crossed his face was worth every ounce of fear. "When?" "Soon. No elaborate wedding, no town spectacle, just us and the people who matter, making promises we intend to keep." "I can work with that." He kissed her there in the open, not caring who saw. And Evelyn kissed him back, feeling something settle in her chest that had been unsettled for years. This was home. Not a place, but a person. Not safety from the world, but partnership in facing it. They were married 3 weeks later in early March. Mara officiated, reading from a book on civil contracts since neither of them wanted religious ceremony. The ranch families attended, along with some of the adult students from evening classes. No fancy clothes, no elaborate reception, just vows spoken honestly and witnessed by people who knew them. "I promise to respect who you are," Caleb said, "to challenge you when you're wrong and support you when you're right, to build something together that's better than what either of us could build alone." "I promise to see you clearly," Evelyn responded, "to never diminish your worth or your intelligence, to fight with you honestly and love you completely, even when it's difficult, especially then." They exchanged rings Caleb had made himself, simple bands hammered from silver, imperfect and real. And when Mara pronounced them married, Evelyn felt something shift, not a loss of independence or identity, an expansion, room for both her individual self and this partnership, space to be both teacher and wife, both strong and vulnerable, both certain and scared. They built a house that spring, larger than the teacher's quarters, with room for books and a proper workspace. Caleb designed it around Evelyn's needs, creating space for her teaching materials and quiet corners for reading. She insisted on a large table where they could work together, him on ranch documents she helped him read and understand, her on lesson plans he'd critique and improve. It wasn't perfect. They fought about money, about time, about how to balance their individual work with their partnership. Evelyn struggled with feeling guilty when she needed solitude. Caleb wrestled with old shame about his literacy, especially when encountering complex documents. But they worked through it, honestly, sometimes painfully, but always together. By summer, the school had 15 students, and Evelyn was pregnant. She told Caleb while they were reading one evening, working through a collection of essays he'd selected himself. "I'm going to need help with the school next year." "Why? What's changing?" "I'll have a baby, probably around November." He stared at her. "You're pregnant?" "Yes." "And you're okay with this?" Terrified and thrilled in equal measure. "You?" He set down his book and pulled her into his lap, holding her like something precious. Same. Completely the same. They sat like that for a long time, feeling the weight and wonder of it. A child. Another life they'd be responsible for shaping. Another person who'd inherit whatever they built here. "We're going to mess this up sometimes," Caleb said. "Definitely. But we'll try our best. Always. That'll have to be enough." It will be. And somehow, impossibly, Evelyn believed it. Believed that they could do this, build a family, maintain the school, create something lasting. Not because they were perfect or had all the answers, but because they were honest and committed and willing to keep trying even when it was hard. That evening, after Caleb had gone to finish last chores, Evelyn sat at her desk and began writing. Not lesson plans or curriculum notes, but thoughts. Reflections on the journey that had brought her here. From rejected mail-order bride to teacher to wife to soon-to-be mother. The pages filled quickly. Stories of students who'd learned to read, observations about ranch life, descriptions of the desert she'd come to love. And through it all, the evolution of her relationship with Caleb, from teacher and student to partners to something deeper than she had words for yet. She wrote until her hand cramped and the lamp burned low. Then she set down her pen and looked at what she'd created. Not perfection, not a tidy narrative with clean resolution, just life. Messy and complicated and real. And for the first time since leaving Boston, Evelyn felt no desire to be anywhere else. This was enough. She was enough. They were enough. Everything else they'd figure out together. The pregnancy was harder than Evelyn expected. Morning sickness lasted well into the afternoon. Her back ached constantly. By August, standing for hours teaching became nearly impossible. She tried to push through, stubborn as always, until Mara found her collapsed in the schoolhouse one afternoon. "That's enough," Mara said, helping her up. "You're taking help whether you want it or not." "I can manage." "You're 7 months pregnant and teaching 15 children in 100-degree heat. No, you can't manage. And you don't have to." Rosa stepped in as assistant teacher, managing the younger students while Evelyn focused on the older ones. Maria Henderson volunteered to help with lesson planning. Other parents rotated through, providing support however they could. It was humbling, accepting help. Evelyn had spent her whole life proving she didn't need anyone. Learning to need people, to trust them with things that mattered, was harder than any lesson she'd taught. Caleb was relentless in his support, sometimes maddeningly so. "You need to rest. I need to finish grading these assignments." "Evelyn, don't. I know my limits." "Do you? Because you passed out yesterday." "I got dizzy. That's different." "It's not, and you know it." He sat beside her, gentler now. "I'm not trying to control you. I'm trying to keep you and our child alive. Let me help." She wanted to argue. Instead, she handed him half the stack of papers. "Fine, but if you grade Michael Henderson's work too easily just because you like him, I'm overruling you." "Deal." They worked in companionable silence until Evelyn's eyes started closing despite her best efforts. "Bed," Caleb said, taking the papers from her hands. "I'm not tired." "You're falling asleep sitting up. Come on." He helped her to their bedroom, patient with her protests. And despite her frustration at her body's limitations, she was grateful. For him, for this life. For having someone who saw her struggle and didn't use it as evidence of weakness. Their daughter was born on a cold November night during a thunderstorm that rattled the windows and made the lamps flicker. The labor was brutal, 18 hours of pain that made Evelyn question every decision that had led her to this moment. Maria Henderson served as midwife, calm and competent even when things got complicated. Caleb stayed the entire time, holding Evelyn's hand through contractions, letting her squeeze until his fingers went numb. I can't do this, Evelyn gasped at one point, exhausted beyond measure. You are doing it, Maria said firmly. You're almost there. I need to push. Then push. The baby arrived just before dawn, tiny and furious and absolutely perfect. It's a girl, Maria announced, placing the infant on Evelyn's chest. Evelyn looked down at her daughter, red-faced and screaming, covered in vernix and blood, the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Caleb leaned over them both, his face wet with tears he didn't bother hiding. She's perfect, he whispered. She's mad as hell, Evelyn corrected. But she was smiling. They named her Sarah, after Evelyn's mother. Sarah Turner, born into a world that wouldn't limit her the way it had limited the women before her. The first months were impossibly hard. Sarah screamed constantly, slept erratically, and seemed determined to test every ounce of patience her parents possessed. Evelyn was exhausted, overwhelmed, and struggling to balance motherhood with teaching. I don't know if I can do both, she admitted to Caleb one night after Sarah had finally fallen asleep. Something has to give. So we adjust. Scale back the school hours, bring in more help, find a rhythm that works. That feels like quitting. It's not quitting. It's adapting. He shifted Sarah in his arms, careful not to wake her. Evelyn, you built this school from nothing. You've taught dozens of children and adults to read. You've changed this community. Taking time to focus on our daughter doesn't erase any of that. But the students they'll still be there when you're ready, and in the meantime, Rosa and Maria can handle more. Let them. It went against every instinct Evelyn had, but she was too tired to fight, so she scaled back, teaching mornings only, delegating afternoon sessions to Rosa and Maria. It felt like failure at first. Then she saw the results. Rosa bloomed as a teacher, developing her own methods and connecting with students in ways Evelyn couldn't. Maria grew more confident, her literacy improving as she taught others. The school didn't collapse without Evelyn running everything. It expanded, became something bigger than one person. See, Caleb said one morning, watching Rosa lead a lesson while Evelyn fed Sarah. You built something that doesn't need you to micromanage. That's not weakness. That's legacy. He was right. The realization was both humbling and freeing. By spring, they'd found a rhythm. Evelyn taught mornings, spent afternoons with Sarah, and evenings reading with Caleb, who had progressed to complex texts and was writing his own observations about ranch management and land stewardship. Listen to this, he said one evening, showing her a passage he'd written about water conservation. Does it make sense? Evelyn read it carefully. The writing was clear, logical, and demonstrated deep understanding of both practical application and theoretical principles. It's good, Caleb. Really good. Good enough to share? With who? I don't know. Other ranchers? People trying to manage land in difficult conditions? He looked uncomfortable. There's a territorial agriculture newsletter. They publish articles about land management, conservation techniques. I was thinking about submitting something. Evelyn set down the paper. You should. What if they reject it? Then you'll revise and try again, or try somewhere else. But Caleb, you have valuable knowledge. People could benefit from what you've learned. Why keep it to yourself? Because people finding out I couldn't read until last year? Will what? Think less of you? Anyone who'd judge you for learning is someone whose opinion doesn't matter. She squeezed his hand. You're not the same person who sat at this table struggling with the alphabet. You've worked hard to get here. Be proud of that. He submitted the article a week later. The rejection came 2 months after that. Evelyn found him in the barn, angry and hurt in equal measure. They said the writing was too practical, not academic enough, that it lacked proper citations and theoretical framework. He threw the rejection letter down. They're right. I'm not educated enough for this. That's not what they said. It's what they meant. No, they said your approach is practical rather than academic. That's not an insult, it's a description. Your knowledge comes from experience, not textbooks. Some publications want academic theory, others want practical application. You submitted to the wrong audience. So I failed. So you learned where not to submit next time. Evelyn picked up the letter. Caleb, every writer gets rejected. Every single one. The difference between people who succeed and people who quit is persistence. You revise, adjust, and try again. Easy for you to say. You've been writing your whole life. And I've been rejected more times than I can count. When I was 22, I submitted essays to every journal in Boston. Every single one rejected me. You know why? Because I was a woman, and they didn't publish women's work. But I kept writing anyway, not for publication, for myself. Because the writing mattered regardless of whether anyone else saw it. Caleb looked at her. You never told me that. Because it's humiliating. But it's also true, rejection is part of creating anything that matters. You decide if it stops you or teaches you. He picked up the rejection letter, read it again. All right, so where do I submit next? Somewhere that values practical knowledge over academic credentials. A working rancher's publication, maybe? Or you start your own newsletter for the territory. My own newsletter? Why not? You know dozens of ranchers facing similar challenges. Why wait for permission from publications that don't understand what you're trying to do? Create your own platform. The idea took root. Within months, Caleb had started a quarterly newsletter for Arizona Territory ranchers, practical advice, tested techniques, solutions to common problems. He wrote most of the content himself, with contributions from other ranchers. It wasn't prestigious or academic. It was useful. The response was immediate. Ranchers across the territory subscribed, shared issues, wrote back with their own experiences. Caleb's practical knowledge, gained from years of experience and sharpened by education, was exactly what people needed. You were right, he told Evelyn one night, reading through subscription requests, about creating something instead of waiting for permission. This matters more than getting published in some academic journal ever would. Because it helps real people with real problems. Yeah. He looked up at her. Thank you for pushing me to try, for not letting me quit when it got hard. That's what we do for each other. It is, isn't it? He pulled her close. We make each other better. Most days. Even the hard ones. Sarah grew into a curious, determined toddler who asked endless questions and climbed everything she wasn't supposed to climb. By age 3, she was already reading simple words taught by Evelyn in quiet morning sessions. By 4, she was attending the school with other children, learning alongside kids whose parents had once been Evelyn's students. The school itself had transformed. What started as 14 children in a converted storage building had grown to nearly 30 students across multiple age ranges. Rosa had become head teacher for younger students. Maria Henderson taught adult literacy classes 3 nights a week. Other teachers had joined, ranch children who'd learned to read and returned to teach others. Evelyn transitioned from primary teacher to administrator and curriculum developer, creating materials and training new teachers. It wasn't what she'd imagined doing when she first arrived at Iron Ridge, but it was more impactful. She wasn't just teaching children to read, she was creating a system that would outlast her. You've built something remarkable, Mara said one afternoon, surveying the expanded schoolhouse and new classroom building. This community is different because of what you started. It's not just me. Rosa, Maria, the other teachers, who you trained, who wouldn't be teaching without your foundation? Mara leaned against the fence. When you arrived here 8 years ago, most children on this ranch couldn't read their own names. Now we have students going to secondary school in Tucson, adults reading newspapers and contracts, people accessing information they never had before. That's your legacy, Evelyn. It's our legacy. Yours for giving me the chance, Caleb's for supporting it, the community's for embracing it. Take the compliment. You're allowed to be proud of what you've accomplished. Evelyn looked at the schoolhouse, the children streaming in for afternoon classes, the evidence of everything that had grown from one woman's stubborn refusal to give up. Maybe Mara was right. Maybe she could be proud of this. Their second child arrived 3 years after Sarah, a son they named Thomas, after Tom Henderson, who'd been one of the first parents to trust Evelyn with his children. Thomas was calmer than Sarah, more observant, content to watch the world instead of attacking it head-on. Just like his father, Evelyn said, watching Caleb hold their son with the same careful wonder he'd shown with Sarah. Let's hope he inherits your stubbornness, though. He'll need it. Why? Because the world's not getting easier. He'll need to be strong and smart and unwilling to accept limitations. Caleb looked at her. Like his mother. Life settled into new rhythms. teaching, writing, raising children, managing a household, and contributing to ranch operations. Some days were chaos, children sick, lessons failing, writing refused to come, exhaustion threatening to overwhelm everything. Other days were grace, breakthroughs in understanding, successful lessons, quiet family evenings, reading together. Evelyn and Caleb's relationship deepened in ways she hadn't anticipated. They still fought, still disagreed about money and time and parenting approaches, but they'd learned to fight productively, to hear each other's perspectives and find compromise. The passion was still there, but it was balanced now with partnership, friendship, and deep respect. "Sometimes I can't believe this is my life," Evelyn admitted one night as they sat on their porch watching stars emerge. "That I went from being rejected and alone to this. You built this. Every choice you made led here. We built it. I couldn't have done any of this alone. Maybe not, but you had to be willing to try. That was all you." He took her hand. "I was just smart enough to recognize what you were capable of and offer you the chance. Best decision I ever made, saying yes to that chance." "Second best," Caleb corrected. "Best decision was saying yes when I asked you to marry me." "Debatable. That one was terrifying. And worth it? Every single day." Years passed. Sarah proved brilliant and headstrong, attending secondary school in Tucson and then, against all odds, university. She came home with ideas about women's suffrage and labor rights and expansion of public education. She argued with her parents constantly, pushing them to think beyond their experiences. "She's exhausting," Caleb said after a particularly heated debate about voting rights. "She's us. Everything we taught her, critical thinking, questioning authority, refusing to accept limitations, she's living it. I know, doesn't make it less exhausting. Would you rather she be quiet and obedient?" "Absolutely not. But maybe sometimes she could be right quietly." Evelyn laughed. "She's our daughter. Quiet was never an option." Thomas followed a different path, more practical, more grounded. He studied agriculture and land management, applying both his father's practical knowledge and his mother's theoretical education. He wrote articles alongside Caleb, their combined perspectives creating something neither could have achieved alone. The school continued growing. By the time Evelyn turned 45, there were 3 full-time teachers and over 50 students. Adult literacy classes ran 4 nights a week. The library she'd dreamed of building finally existed, a small building filled with donated books and materials purchased through community fundraising. "We did it," she told Caleb one afternoon, standing in the library surrounded by shelves she'd once thought impossible. "Everything I imagined when I first arrived here, we actually did it." "You doubted we would?" "Constantly, every step of the way." "But you kept going anyway." "So did you." With the reading, the writing, the newsletter, all of it. We both kept pushing even when it was hard. That's the only way anything worthwhile gets built. He pulled a book from the shelf, the Emerson essays that had been his goal 8 years ago. "Remember when I first brought this to you, when I could barely read simple sentences? You were determined even then." "I was desperate. Desperate to access something I couldn't reach, to understand ideas I only felt vaguely. You gave me that access." He opened to a marked passage. "This part, about trusting yourself over society's expectations. I understand it now. Not just intellectually, but in my bones. That's what we've built here. A place where people can trust themselves, access knowledge, make informed choices. That's revolutionary. On a small scale, every revolution starts small." One evening in late autumn, 20 years after Evelyn first arrived at Iron Ridge, she received a letter from an unexpected source. The return address was Boston. The name was vaguely familiar, a cousin she hadn't spoken to in decades. She opened it carefully. The letter was brief. Her father had died. The funeral had already happened. There was a small inheritance if she wanted to claim it. Otherwise, it would go to her stepmother's family. Evelyn read it twice, waiting to feel something. Grief, regret, anger, anything. Instead, she felt nothing. Her father had made it clear years ago that she was an inconvenience. His death changed nothing. She showed the letter to Caleb. "You want to claim the inheritance?" "I don't know. It feels dishonest taking money from someone who didn't want me." "He was still your father. You're entitled to it." "Legally, maybe, Morally, I'm not sure. They discussed it over several days. Finally, Evelyn decided to claim the inheritance. Not for herself, but for the school. The money went toward building a proper schoolhouse, expanding the library, and creating a fund for students who wanted to pursue further education but couldn't afford it. Your father probably would have hated this, Caleb observed as they watched construction begin on the new building. Probably. He thought education was wasted on women and poor people. Using his money to educate both seems like poetic justice. You're not even a little bitter? About what? He was a small, scared man who couldn't imagine a world bigger than his prejudices. I could be angry about that, or I could use the resources he left to build something better. The second option seems more productive. The new schoolhouse opened in spring. It was beautiful, proper classrooms, adequate lighting, space designed specifically for learning. On opening day, over 100 people attended, students past and present, their families, community members who'd benefited from the school's existence. Evelyn stood at the front of the main classroom and felt the weight of it. 20 years of work, hundreds of students, lives changed, opportunities created, patterns broken. It wasn't perfect. There were still children who couldn't access education, adults who remained illiterate, barriers that seemed insurmountable, but progress had been made, real, measurable progress. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice carrying across the crowded room. 20 years ago, I arrived at Iron Ridge with nothing but books and stubbornness. I had failed at everything I'd tried, been rejected by everyone who was supposed to want me. This ranch, this community, gave me a chance when nobody else would. And together we've built something remarkable. Not just this building, but a commitment to education, a belief that everyone deserves access to knowledge, regardless of their circumstances. That's what we're celebrating today. Not bricks and wood, but possibility. The applause was genuine and sustained. Afterward, former students approached to share their stories. A man who'd learned to read at 30 and now ran a successful business. A woman who'd become a teacher herself, carrying the work to neighboring communities. Children who'd gone on to university, to careers, to lives their parents couldn't have imagined. Each story was a thread in a tapestry Evelyn had helped weave. Not alone, never alone, but as part of something larger than herself. That night, exhausted and happy, she sat with Caleb on their porch. 20 years, she said. Hard to believe. Feels like yesterday sometimes. Feels like forever others. Do you ever regret it? This life, I mean. It's not easy. Regret marrying you? Building this life? Absolutely not. Why would I? Because it's been hard. The work, the sacrifice, the constant struggle to make things better. Everything worthwhile is hard. But look at what we have. Children who are educated and confident, a community that values knowledge, work that matters. That's not something to regret. That's something to be proud of. Are you proud? Of you? Always. Of us? Absolutely. Of what we've built together. He gestured toward the ranch, the school, the evidence of their life. More than I can express. Evelyn leaned against him, comfortable in the silence that followed. They'd built something real here. Not perfect, but honest. Not easy, but meaningful. Years continued passing. Sarah married a professor and started teaching at a women's college back east. Thomas took over ranch operations from Mara, implementing sustainable practices he'd learned from his father and researched himself. He married Rosa's daughter, creating another generation of families, intertwined by education and partnership. Caleb's newsletter had evolved into a respected publication across multiple territories, with contributions from ranchers, scientists, and agricultural experts. His practical knowledge combined with rigorous research had created something valuable and lasting. He was invited to speak at conferences, to consult on land management projects, to share what he'd learned through decades of experience. Who would have thought, he said one evening, reading through a speaking invitation. The man who couldn't read 25 years ago is now asked to lecture at universities. Anyone who knew you could have predicted it. You were always brilliant. You just needed access to the tools to express it. You gave me those tools. You did the work. I just opened the door. We make a good team. The best. Their partnership had weathered storms, financial struggles, health scares, children's crises, personal conflicts. But it had held. Not because it was easy or perfect, but because they'd committed to honesty, growth, and choosing each other repeatedly over years. When Evelyn turned 55, the community threw her a celebration. Former students came from across the territory and beyond. People whose lives had been changed by the school, by access to education, by the belief that knowledge was for everyone. "We wanted to honor you," Rosa said, now in her 30s and head teacher of the expanded school system. "Everything you've built, everyone you've taught. You changed this community fundamentally. We wanted you to know that's recognized and appreciated." The celebration was overwhelming. Stories shared, letters read, evidence of impact she'd never fully comprehended. She'd been too focused on daily work to realize how far the ripples extended. "I didn't do this alone," she said when called upon to speak. "Every teacher here contributed. Every parent who supported their children's education. Every student who chose to learn. This is collective achievement, not individual heroism. I may have started something, but all of you sustained and expanded it. That's what makes it lasting." But privately, watching her former students and their children, Evelyn allowed herself to feel pride. She'd come to Arizona territory as a rejected woman with nothing but books and stubbornness. She'd built a life, a family, a legacy, not through compromise or making herself smaller, but by being exactly who she was and refusing to apologize for it. Caleb found her later, standing alone, watching the celebration continue without her. "You okay?" "Just thinking about everything. How I got here, what it cost, what it gave me." "Regrets?" "None. You?" "Not a single one." He put his arm around her shoulders. "We did good, Evelyn. Better than good. We built something that'll outlast us. That's more than most people can say." "We did, didn't we?" She leaned into him, comfortable after 20 years of partnership. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me when everyone else looked away. For believing I was worth taking a chance on. For building this life with me." "I should be thanking you. You transformed everything. Me, this community, what's possible here." "We transformed each other. That's how partnership works." They stood together watching their community celebrate, watching the evidence of everything they'd built together. It wasn't perfect. There was still work to do, still barriers to break, still people who needed access to education and couldn't get it. But progress had been made. Real, lasting progress. And that would have to be enough. 28 years after arriving at Iron Ridge, Evelyn finally retired from active teaching. She was 63, her body worn from decades of hard work, her mind still sharp but slower than it once was. Rosa had fully taken over school operations. A new generation of teachers carried the work forward. Retirement felt strange at first. She'd defined herself by work for so long that without it she felt unmoored. But slowly she found new rhythms. Writing her experiences, documenting the school's history, mentoring young teachers, time with grandchildren, reading for pleasure instead of purpose. Caleb retired around the same time, turning ranch operations over to Thomas. Together they traveled, visited Sarah in her eastern city, explored parts of the territory they'd never seen. They fought less frequently now, their arguments tempered by years of practice and the knowledge that time was finite. "No regrets?" Caleb asked one evening as they sat on their porch, bodies aged but minds still engaged. "A few small ones, moments I'd handle differently, words I'd take back. But the big things? The choices that mattered? No. You?" "Same. I'd do it all again exactly the same way." "Even the hard parts?" "Especially those. The hard parts taught us the most." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands like they'd done thousands of times before. The ranch continued around them, life moving forward with or without their direct involvement. Their children were building their own lives. Their grandchildren were asking the same questions they'd once asked. The cycle continued. "We did it," Evelyn said softly. "Everything we set out to do and things we never imagined. We actually did it." "We did." Caleb squeezed her hand. "And it was worth it. Every difficult moment, every sacrifice, every struggle, worth it." As the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in colors that still took Evelyn's breath away after 3 decades, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From rejected mail-order bride to respected educator. From isolated and alone to surrounded by family and community. From believing she was too much for the world to discovering a place where everything she was became essential. The transformation hadn't been smooth or easy. It had been messy, painful, uncertain. But it had been real. And it had been hers. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not perfection, not some fairy tale resolution where everything worked out exactly as planned. Just a life lived honestly, with purpose, alongside someone who saw her clearly and chose her anyway. A life that had rippled outward, touching others, creating possibilities that would continue long after she was gone. A life that had rejected rejection and built something lasting from the ashes of failure. That was enough, more than enough. It was everything.